Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Table. I am your host, of course, Captain B-Nard, flying solo today to talk to you guys about what I want to see from Pokemon Generation 8. So, we are obviously a ways away from the release of Gen 8. We are still about a month out from the release of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which presumably means we are at least a year, if not more, away from the release of a Gen 8 game. So I thought this would be the perfect time, given that we have no knowledge whatsoever on what Gen 8 might be, to go ahead and give you my opinion as to what direction the franchise should be taking moving forward. So I prepared a list, I have it right here, of a bunch of things that I think will be important, things that I would like to see the game do or contain in Gen 8. And so I am just going to get into talking about these things with you guys. So these are in no particular order of importance, but I tried to group them by going with the general concepts first and then moving toward the more specific ideas I have later in the video. So let's start off here kind of simple. I want to start off by talking about the size of the generation, and what I mean by that is the amount of new Pokemon introduced in the generation. Now, in my opinion, I think it would be a very good play on Nintendo's part if they were to keep this generation small like they have with the past couple of generations, because at this point in the Pokemon franchise, we have over 800 Pokemon in the National Pokédex, which is a lot of freaking Pokemon. Okay, so we really don't need quantity as far as new Pokemon introduced go. We just need quality. So I would be completely fine if they introduced anywhere around 60-ish new Pokemon in the new generation. That would be completely fine with me. That would give you room for your starters, your legendaries, a couple of mythics, some other cool concepts, type combinations, brand new, anything like that. Things of that nature. So you would still have, a good amount of room to do some cool stuff with that. At the same time, you wouldn't be getting a mass quantity of Pokemon that some of which might not be very good, which we have seen in the past, specifically going back to Gen 5. For those of you who have watched me for any length of time, you probably know that I'm not a big fan of Gen 5, and one of the biggest reasons of that is because they introduced 150 brand new Pokemon in that generation, and there were quite a lot of them that were not that good, to be blunt about it and to be nice about it as well. So I think that they took a step in the right direction in both Gen 6 and Gen 7. I believe in Gen 6 they released somewhere around 70 new Pokemon. In Gen 7 it was somewhere around 85. So that is completely fine by me. And they could even go lower than that as far as I'm concerned. Because the more overall Pokemon you have, the more devalued each individual Pokemon gets, in my opinion. So, again, small generation would be a really positive thing, in my opinion. And they could even circumvent this a little bit like they did in Gen 7 by releasing alternate forms of Pokemon. They did a lot of that. Or even what they did in Gen 6 by releasing Mega Evolutions, which are essentially just alternate forms of existing Pokemon. That way you give the sensation to the gamer that you're getting something new. When you're not entirely getting something new, you're just getting a remade or a redefined version of an existing concept versus a brand new concept altogether. So I really do think that would be a great way for them to go. Moving along, the next thing I want to mention is the story mode in these games. And I think it would definitely be a really good idea for them to have a shorter story mode than they did, specifically in Gen 7. Sun Moon and especially Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, the stories were good stories, but they kind of drug on. They kind of took too long, and there were kind of too many cutscenes, in my opinion. So I would really like to see them cut back on that sort of thing and kind of make the main game just a little bit shorter. because I think that for most players of this game, the story mode of this game is not the only reason, or maybe not even the biggest reason, that people are buying these games. So to extend the story mode, to drag it out longer than it has to be, is kind of a negative in my opinion. You can tell a good story in not that length of a time, or that large of a time. Um, so yeah, that's kind of something that's unnecessary in my opinion, to just have it drag on. And again, especially with the cutscenes too, like Sun Moon, and especially Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, there were just so many cutscenes in the story mode that it just devalued it in my opinion. So I think that would definitely be a positive step for them to kind of make all that a little shorter. And that kind of feeds into the next point I want to make, which is having more of an expanded post game. And now the second games in the series, or in the generations rather, tend to usually do this. In Gen 6, we saw this with ORAS, and then in Gen 7 with Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, that they do tend to have more of an expanded post game than the first games in the generation do. So those would be in Gen 6 your X and Y, and in Gen 7 your Sun and Moon. And I think that is really a positive thing, because it's cool, if they tack stuff on at the end, that's just kind of cool extra stuff that you can do, to just kind of get more out of the game. But at the same time, you're already done with the main story of the game, but there's still some more to do. So I think that is definitely a good way to go for them. And they kind of go hand in hand, because having a little bit of a shorter story mode would put more value into having an expanded post game. It would make people want to play it more, because quite honestly, for me, as far as Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon goes, by the time I finally trudged through the story mode, and again, it was a good story, I did enjoy it, but it was just so long that by the time that I got to the end of it, I was just kind of like, for the post game stuff with the Rainbow Rocket and the Ultra Wormholes, which was all really cool in my opinion. It was great ideas, great concepts. But I was just kind of exhausted by the length of the main game, that it wasn't as cool for me as I think it could have been if the main game hadn't drug on quite as long as it did. So that is a big thing for me, something that I think would be a really good idea for them moving forward, to kind of adjust their game accordingly. Okay. So the next thing I want to mention, and this is going to be a big one for me, and something that is very important in my opinion, and something that is also very long overdue in my opinion for the Pokemon franchise, that I would like to see them do in Gen 8, is we need a complete overhaul of the online interface for Pokemon, because this has been unacceptably bad for a very long time. The online interface in Gen 6 we got was the PSS, I believe it was, and then in Gen 7 we got the Festival Plaza, and these were just bad. The PSS wasn't completely terrible, because at least in that situation, you were able to be, playing the game like in the story mode, or in, roaming around or doing whatever you wanted to do, and you could still be contacted as long as you were connected to the internet by someone else with a battle or a trade or something to that nature. In Gen 7 with the Festival Plaza, as rough as the PSS was, the Festival Plaza was even worse, honestly. Speaking personally as a competitive battler who obviously has to use the PSS for most of his games, I will say, or rather the Festival Plaza, I should say, in Gen 7, I will say that the Festival Plaza was nothing but hot garbage, to be completely blunt about it. It was just terrible, poorly designed, poorly executed, didn't like it at all. It just had so many issues with it. So, and the best example of that I can give is like I was talking about in Gen 6. At least you had that freedom to do other things. As long as you were connected to the internet, you could still have a battle or a trade wherever you were. In Gen 7 in the Festival Plaza, not only do you have to be in the Festival Plaza connected to the internet, so you can't do anything else, you can only do one thing at a time, which is kind of the same as it was in Gen 6 too, because with the PSS, if you were challenging someone to a battle or trade, that was all you could do really. Now, at least with the PSS, what it did was it if someone else was challenging you to a battle or a trade while you were challenging someone else to a battle or a trade, it would actually immediately cancel your request that you were sending to someone in order to present you with the new request that someone was sending you, which was a bad system. Don't get me wrong, it was, but the Festival Plaza just took that and made it just that much worse because now in Gen 7 with the Festival Plaza, you can't even see someone else challenging you to a battle or a trade if you're challenging someone else to a battle or trade, which is just terrible, honestly. Um, how hard would it be to have two lists on your home screen on the Festival Plaza, one that has incoming challenges, the other that has outgoing challenges, so you can manage and see everything that's going on. So if you're sending a challenge, you can also see if someone's sending you a challenge, and then you can decide if you want to, which one you want to pursue. Um, that's pretty simple. That's pretty basic. I thought of that in like 10 seconds. So I really kind of don't understand why Nintendo can't do better than that. In the year 2017, these games were released. Now we're in 2018. And by the time Gen 8 comes out, we're going to be in 2019. Okay. So this is just a really inexcusable, you know, situation in my opinion with the online interface that we've been getting in Pokemon games for a very long time. And as kind of a side note, it's kind of something that has just really baffled me for the longest time about Nintendo. Um, it's just confusing to me how they can kind of be on the forefront of innovation with gaming in so many ways, and then in so many other ways they can be simultaneously behind the times, like with these, online interface specifically. Um, you know, the hardware that the DS runs on is nothing that impressive, and the Switch hardware, though much better than the DS hardware, is not terribly impressive to me either. But still, these software systems are more than capable of doing more than what we got. So come on, Nintendo. Like I said, it's 2018. Do something about it. Fix it. It's something that just is long overdue to be fixed. So I really hope that they do that in Gen 8. And again, there's really no reason not to. There's no reason it couldn't have been done in Gen 7, honestly. But in Gen 8, with the jump to the Switch, there is really no excuse in this situation that we can't go ahead and get that online interface fixed, that we can actually have a good online interface. So hopefully we will be seeing that, because that is a big one for me, no question. Okay, so now I want to go ahead and move to a few more specific ideas that I have on how we could potentially improve Gen 8 and the Pokemon franchise in general. Now, these might seem a little random to you. These are just ideas that I've had about ways, either small or big, that I think could make the game better. A lot of them are going to be concepts that we've already seen in previous Pokemon games. However, for whatever reason, they've been removed from the newest generations, or maybe they even haven't been removed from the newest generation. Maybe it's something that was just dreamed up in the new generation that I'd like to see return in the next generation. So, That being said, the first thing that I want to mention, and this might seem again like coming from left field for you guys, but I would really like to see in Gen 8, I would really like to see Nintendo buff the ice type. And this is a big thing for me because ever since the dawn of Pokemon in Gen 1, ice has been hands down the worst type. And it is just so much worse than every other type in terms of its weakness to resistance ratio, that is just really really just kind of not good, just kind of unacceptable in my opinion. And I think we could definitely do something about that in Gen 7. So to kind of, I'm sorry, in Gen 8. Um, well, actually, we could have done something about it in Gen 6, but but they didn't. So, to kind of give you guys a little perspective on this, there are only out of the 18 types in Pokemon, there are only 4 types that have more weaknesses than they do resistances and immunities. And those types are Grass and Rock, which both have 5 weaknesses and 4 resistances. Then we have Psychic that has 3 resistances. I'm sorry, it has 3 weaknesses and 2 resistances. And then we have Ice, which has 4 weaknesses and 1 resistance. So you can kind of see the problem there. That is a drastically skewed ratio. Uh, More so than any other type in the game by far. Because again, like I said, only 4 types have more weaknesses than they do resistances and immunities, and ice has a lot more. So, and I don't think you can really do anything about ice's weaknesses because all of ice's weaknesses kind of make sense. The weakness to fire, definitely. The weakness to fighting, definitely. And also the weaknesses to rock and steel. They really, they really do make a lot of sense. So you can't really take any of them away and have it make sense, in my opinion. So the only thing you can really do is add more resistances to the ice type, which is really what I'm driving at here. What I would like to see. And I do have some ideas for types that ice could resist that kind of balance it out and make it more fair. So, the number one type on my list that I have is ground. Now, hear me out on this. Um, Ground, in my opinion, again, is probably the most overpowered type offensively in the game. Um, so it is one of only 2 types that is super effective against 5 other types, the other being fighting. So the big difference between fighting and ground is then fighting is either resisted or immune by 6 types. So it has a 5 to 6 ratio on it, which still gives it, a good balance. Compare that with ground. Ground only has 3 types that either resist it or are immune to it. So that's a 5 to 3 ratio right there. You can see kind of the imbalance there that exists. So um, that is really why I think ice should resist ground. It's kind of a 2 birds, 1 stone situation. Ice needs more resistances. Ground could really use more types to resist it. So there you go. 2 birds, 1 stone. I know it doesn't necessarily make the world of sense, but it doesn't really not make sense either, in my opinion. So there's some stuff as far as type interactions go in Pokemon. A lot of them make perfect sense. Like, okay, fire is weak to water, obviously makes perfect sense. Grass is weak to fire, again, perfect sense. Other interactions don't make as much sense. Dark being weak to bug, for example. So yeah. But I think this one would definitely make enough sense that it would be viable. Now there are some people who may raise the argument and say, well, the ability levitate exists, and that grants an immunity to ground types, so that is enough to counterbalance the fact that ground has so many more types that it is super effective against versus types that resist it. And I don't entirely agree with that point. I would agree to a small extent. Um, and here's why is because levitate is kind of although a lot of Pokemon do get it, it is kind of limited in distribution, definitely much more so than a type resistance. And an ability based resistance or immunity for that reason will always do a worse job at checking a type than a type based resistance or immunity, because you have to worry about Pokemon having that ability, having other things that may make them competitively viable, such as stats or move pool, things of that nature. Plus, that eats up their ability, so now that kind of takes something else away from that Pokemon that, if a type resisted another type, that they could also have an ability on top of that that would make that Pokemon worth using. But if your ability is the source of your resistance or your immunity to that type, that kind of, takes another potential plus away from you. So I definitely don't fully count levitate. It's kind of in the same sense that you don't really count, like when you're counting fires, types it's super effective against versus types that resist it. You don't count flash fire, for that same reason. So like I said, you can't fully count that in my opinion. So we would really could really use another type to resist ground, and ice is just the perfect candidate in my opinion because it just desperately needs at least one more resistance, if not more. Um, so I do have a couple of other ideas as to types that ice could resist to kind of balance it out and make it better. Um, on my list, none of them are quite as strong a contender, in my opinion, as ground is for getting that resistance for ice, but they're all kind of not bad. I have the idea of potentially fairy, because fairy is a very strong type, especially has great neutral type coverage, um, but it is a very balanced type as well, in my opinion. So I almost hesitate to bring it up because it is a very inherently balanced type. And in Gen 6, Fairy was actually introduced to kind of balance all the other types out, specifically Dragon, especially. So, um, but still, it is a very strong type, and having another type that resists it could definitely be a big plus. So, again, not a bad idea for ice. Again, it doesn't make the world of sense, but it doesn't not make sense either, in my opinion. Um, I could also bring water up as another type that ice could potentially resist, but the same kind of argument follows suit with fairy, is that water is already an incredibly balanced type in and of itself, so I would hesitate to bring that up as a possibility to, change that, but it is definitely a possibility. Again, it does make a certain level of sense. The prospect of ice resisting water does make a certain level of sense to me. But, again, like I said, water is already a very balanced type, but it is a possibility. And then the only other thing I could think of that would kind of make sense would be grass, for ice to resist grass. Um, again, doesn't make the world of sense, but doesn't not make sense either. Um, the only other thing I could say about that, though, is that there are already so many types that resist grass that grass doesn't really need another type to resist it. I think, what is it? Grass and bug, I believe, are resisted by more types than any other in Pokemon. So, um, they really don't need to be nerfed any farther, but it could be a possibility because the bottom line is this: as far as ice goes, we really just need to, or Nintendo, in my opinion, need to do something to buff ice defensively because it is just so bad, and it makes most ice type Pokemon completely unusable in competitive play, which is obviously a big thing for me, being a very competitive player. I would really like to see ice kind of be elevated to the point that more ice type Pokemon could be used competitively. I think it would really shake the competitive scene up, and it would really, really make things better if they were to go that road. So, but yeah, that's kind of the point, is that ice needs something, going for it, because it doesn't really have much of anything going for it at this point, in my opinion. So, um, definitely needs some more resistances, and those are top contenders, in my opinion. So, all right, so moving right along, the next thing I'd like to talk about. That I would like to see happen in Gen 8, and that is actually the introduction of more entry hazards. So, right now, entry hazards are in kind of a weird place in the Pokemon metagame. Obviously, you have an entry hazard like Stealth Rock that is the most widely used entry hazard. Arguably the best. I would definitely make that argument that it is the best entry hazard. Um, and then you have the other entry hazards. You have spikes, toxic spikes, and a sticky web. So, um, those obviously see much less play than does Stealth Rock, but I still think that it would definitely be cool if we got some new hazards, at least one or two, I would say, that would kind of be really cool. It would definitely change the game, change the way the game is played. Um, you know, and the only really idea I have for a new entry hazard, because I don't have many besides the one, is an entry hazard that could potentially lower either your defense and or your special defense. Um, I would have to say it would probably have to do both in order for people to want to use it, because just running, something that did one or the other doesn't really seem worth it to me. Um, so yeah, I think it would probably have to do both. I don't know. You could call it icy spikes or whatever. Maybe it could work the same way as spikes and toxic spikes, in the sense that there are layers that stack. So maybe the first layer could lower one stat, the second layer could lower another stat, and so on and so forth. Which I actually think is a pretty good, pretty interesting idea. Um, Other than that, I don't really have any ideas as to good entry hazards, because I feel like anything I could think of other than that would either be too good or not good enough, to be a move. Most entry hazards, as they should, kind of suffer from limited distribution unless they have the move tutor, like in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. They have the move tutors for Stealth Rock. So, likewise, hazard removal moves such as Defog and Rapid Spin also have very limited distribution. So that's kind of why what I said before, where entry hazards are kind of in a strange spot in Pokemon, because in the games where we do have the move tutors, they tend to be um, a bigger thing because more Pokemon have access to them, but they also tend to be um, more easily removed because more Pokemon have access to Defog to get them off the field, um, versus games that we don't have access to the move tutors. It's kind of a weird situation because less Pokemon can know the moves, but also less Pokemon can know the moves that remove them. So, one thing I think would shake this all up and make things very interesting, is that I think that all entry hazards should have the same caveat that toxic spikes have. Whereas, if a Pokemon of that same type is switched into the field, those hazards are removed from the field. So that's the way toxic spikes work, obviously. If a poison type is switched in under toxic spikes, the toxic spikes go away. So I think that would be a great idea, specifically for Stealth Rock. I think that would be amazing. Um, if when a rock type is switched in, the Stealth Rocks are absorbed and they are removed from the field, because not only would that really mitigate the hazards seen on the game specifically for Stealth Rock, but it would also give a type like Rock another edge in the game, which again, as I mentioned, going back to weaknesses, resistances, and immunities ratio, Rock is one of those four types that has more weaknesses than it does resistances. So that would definitely give the rock type another edge and another reason for people to want to use more rock type Pokemon competitively, which I think is great. I'm all for, you know, opening up as many possibilities as we can, because that's the great thing about Pokemon battling, honestly, is opening up possibilities. That's just what makes the game really fun. So I think that would be really cool. I would definitely like to, I guess the overall point is this, I would definitely like to see hazards play more of a role in the game than they do moving forward. And those are just some of the ideas I have that I think would kind of make that happen. So, moving along, the next thing I'd like to see actually is something I'd like to see come back from Gen 6. I would like to see them bring this concept back to Gen 8, and that is easy method of EV training your Pokemon. So in Gen 6, it was not perfect, it was tedious, but it was easier than the alternative. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about the um, punching bag system, essentially, that they had in Gen 6, which is where you could tap the bags. With the stylus, your Pokemon would either pick them up or you would win them in mini games, and then you would go ahead and break the bags to increase the EVs on your Pokemon. So that might have been tedious, yes. But at the same time, I think that added another dimension to the game with the mini games, which, by the way, also gave you increased EVs in that stat. So the mini games were a part of it as well. Um, but also, it kind of made EV training easier. As opposed to the traditional way of EV training, which is you have to feed it the vitamins and you have to put the special item on it and go find X amount of Pokemon in the wild that give you those EVs and kill X amount of this Pokemon and X amount of that Pokemon to go ahead and get your Pokemon fully EV trained. So that is all kind of tedious, and I'm not a fan of it. So I would really like to see there be a better way. There has to be a better way. An easier way, a more practical way of EV training your Pokemon other than power saves. And I think that's one of the things that kind of push a lot of people into using those kinds of things, is that when the game makes something like that is such an essential core piece of competitive battling, when that is so tedious and or difficult to kind of do, that really does push people into hacking their games more. So yeah, I would really like to see not necessarily the exact same thing that we got in Gen 6, but I would really like to see some sort of easy EV training, introduced into Gen 8, because it just it really is, it just really is hard, the way it is set up, and again, it is such an essential part of um, competitive play, especially. So that would definitely be a big plus for the game if they could do that. Um, Another thing I'd like to see them bring back, this is actually from Gen 7, and that is the ride Pokemon instead of the HMs. And that is something, I've mentioned it before, something that was well overdue in the world of Pokemon, which is the removal of HMs, because they are just bad moves that take up move slots on Pokemon, and it forces you to either have one bad Pokemon with all the HMs on it that it can fit to try and get your way through, or it forces you to, on your good Pokemon that you're trying to use in the story mode, waste move slots on these bad moves. So I thought it was a really great idea in Gen 7, the introduction of the ride Pokemon, where that you could, once you got the pager for that specific Pokemon, you could call them whenever you want to kind of get you through the areas that you needed to get through. So that was great. I really hope they do bring that back in Gen 8 because it really is really a positive step for the game. So, kind of making things a little easier, a little more player friendly, and I am a fan of that. So, um, kind of feeding along, the Pokemon being out topic. The next thing I would like to see is actually a callback to what they did in Gen 2, and that is to have the party Pokemon at the front of your party walk with you outside the Pokeball, which I thought was the coolest thing in the world in Gold and Silver, and then again in Heart Gold and Soul Silver in Gen 4. Um, so I kind of don't understand why they haven't done this since then, because to me it's not a technological thing in my mind. It's just, just a like, oh, we didn't feel like it thing, which sucks. um so I would really like to see that make a comeback in Gen 8, because I think that's just a really cool little piece of the game that kind of just makes the game more fun. You can walk with your Pokemon out in front, and then, it gains friendship faster or whatever because it's walking with you. So, kind of a small thing, but at the same time, something that would really enhance the game. Um, Following that same train of thought as well, speaking of enhancing visuals on the game. The next thing I want to mention is something that is going to be brand new in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, which again have not come out yet as of this video. But that is going to be the fact that we are going to be able to see Pokemon in the wild for the very first time, which is again something, in my opinion, that has been long overdue in the world of Pokemon. Because who doesn't want to go out into the grass and just see, the Pidgeys and the Rattatas, roaming around in the grass, or, see the Magikarp and the Tentacool swimming around in the water areas. Um, that's something that would really enhance the experience of the game, in my opinion, and I'm really glad that they are doing it in Let's Go, and I really do hope that they bring that to Gen 8. I know there's a lot of talk and speculation as to what they might bring to Gen 8 from Let's Go and what they might not. That's definitely something I think they should bring to Gen 8, and I don't think there's any reason that they couldn't do that, because obviously with Let's Go being on the Switch, and Gen 8 also being on the Switch, it shouldn't be a technological limitation like it may have been before. So that would definitely be a big thing for me. I would love to see that. Um, and actually, the last thing I have here, and again, it's a little thing, and this is actually a callback to every generation besides Gen 7, is that I want to see the return of the National Pokédex. This is one of those things that I don't really understand why they didn't have it in Gen 7, but it really kind of bothered me, even though it is kind of a little thing, that it's something that had been in every generation prior to Gen 7. Maybe not at first. Obviously, normally you have the regional Pokédex first, and then you will have the national Pokédex after that once you beat the game and you gain access to all those, all that extra stuff and all those extra Pokemon that weren't available along the main roads and that kind of thing. So, yeah, that would be, something that I would really just like to see come back. And again, I don't really know why they didn't do it. I was actually kind of shocked when I got Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, and came to the realization that there was no national Pokédex. Just really kind of baffled me, that they would do that they would kind of omit that. It just seemed like, you know unnecessary. But yeah, I would really like to see that come back, because it's really cool to be able to see all the Pokemon in a line and see the kind of evolution throughout the generations of the Pokemon franchise and that sort of thing. So I would definitely enjoy seeing that back in Gen 8. So, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I covered pretty much everything that I can think of as of this point in time that I would want to see from Pokemon Generation 8, that I would want to see the developers either innovate or bring back from previous generations. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff I haven't thought of, but those are kind of the big ones in my mind right now. So, hopefully, most of this stuff happens. I mean, when I look at each thing that I mentioned in the back of my head, I'm kind of thinking that, thinking about the probability as to whether or not this will happen in Gen 8. And I think some of this stuff, like, I think, getting a smaller generation, I think we're bound to, get that in some fashion. Or the national Pokédex, things like that. I think we probably will get, as opposed to the buff of the ice type, which is something I think we probably won't get, unfortunately. But I guess we'll just have to see. Like I said, we are a long ways away from Gen 8. At least a year, I would have to say. But yeah, that is kind of just some of the stuff, really all the stuff I can think of at this point that I would really like to see Nintendo do with Pokemon Generation 8. So, thank you guys for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. More episodes of the Captain's Table will be to come. And hopefully you guys will enjoy that as they come. New topics every time we sit down and talk. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.